historic settlement is paving the way for an overhaul in how home buyers and sellers pay realtors' fees.
Yeah, John D'Souza, president of Cressy and Everett Real Estate, joins us now talking about these changes going into effect this weekend. Just so you know, we've got 5 minutes, but take however long you want because I want to make sure that people understand this.
Sure.
What's happening?
Yeah.
What's happening this weekend?
Well, there's two things are happening. We've had legal changes happening around us and also regulations nationally, right?
Okay.
So effective tomorrow, we're asking realtors to behave differently and to do things a little differently. So part of a long history, multi-year situation, but the industry has really come to understand that we can do a better job being more transparent and being clear with some issues, especially having to do with compensation. Okay, so the changes are really going to be more mechanical changes, and I'd be glad to tell you about that.
Yeah, and please do, because, you know, let's be honest, buyers have a lot of fees to begin with. It seems like in every avenue, but this kind of gives them an option. Is that right? They have more of a say?
Actually, both sides
Wow.
have options, and that's what we're going to be doing differently. We're going to be explaining those options a lot better and letting both the buyers and their sellers make their decisions. So, for example, when we work with a seller, we're going to be super clear about all the options that they had. Now, they've always have had them. It's just that maybe we haven't explained them as fully as we can now, so we will. And specifically when it comes to who pays what and how they structure their offer in terms of that compensation. They may do it the same way we've done it for 30 years, or they may choose to do it a little bit differently, okay? And if they do it differently, one of the options is that there may be some costs coming on to the buyer's side, all right? So because of that, we want to make sure that when, on the other hand, when we work with buyers, that we're really educating them about all of this. And one of the things that people are going to see, probably the biggest change that they'll see starting this weekend, is that before we can provide any real estate services to a buyer, we need to have a written agreement.
Wow.
And so that's going to be a big deal.
Gotcha.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Wow.
But again, the spirit of it is clarity and transparency, right? So we want to make sure that as the buyer comes into the process, right, that they know exactly what they're in for, that they know exactly who's going to be responsible for which fees, right? Again, it can be done different ways. We may be doing it in some new ways in the future as an industry.
Sure.
So we got to make sure that they understand it. So it means that we need to have a written document signed with that buyer before we can deliver services, and that means before we can show them a home.
John, let me ask you, what does that look like if that does not happen, if a realtor does not make those things clear as day in the paperwork? Is there a fine that takes place? Is there a license revocation?
This is a very serious change for us, and that's what you're hearing us talk about it, because we don't want to just slide it under. We're taking it on very seriously, and we realize in a way it's a little bit of a hiccup perhaps in the relationship. It's a little bit of a, may not feel so smooth and natural, but we're that committed to the importance of the clarity that we're going to go through that and make sure that people understand what we're talking about.
So really quickly, so if I'm at the table and I'm a buyer and I call you up and I say, hey, I want you to help me with this, you have to then say, okay, let's meet, but you have to look at this paper. I'm going to mail it to you first. You need to read over before I continue any conversation.
And yes, and we have choices about how we can do that, right? So I can change the scope of the agreement, to make it better suited for you.
Sure.
But I got to make sure that you understand what rights you have. Because there's legal rights that you have as a buyer, I need to make sure that you understand what services I'm willing to offer you. And for that, what we're willing to charge.
Wow.
And by the way, some of those charges may be paid for by the seller, but some may be paid for by the buyer. So again, we need to get that clarity, and with that, build a strategy that works for that buyer.
And this was a big national story. In fact, one of the top stories on nightly news with Lester Holt last night. What was the big driver for this change? What caused this change?
There has been legal reviews on how we've done business for many years happening. We think that the way we've done business has been perfectly fine. We have, our company handles 3,000 sites of business every year, and the great majority of our buyers and sellers are delighted with the work we do. So that's okay, right? However, they've made the case that we need to be more transparent, that we need to do some things. So we've agreed to make some changes in terms of how we share some information, how we don't share some other information, kind of technical about the business. But it's all about having greater clarity so that everybody involved is totally aware of the costs.
That was a great question, because me sitting here, I'm saying, well, you guys have been doing the same way for decades.
Right.
Which suddenly changed, and it sounds like there's just more transparency and being upfront at this point, right?
Correct. We don't control the market. Okay? The market is so much bigger than any one of us. So as we become clear about some of these options, some people may choose to behave differently. That's perfectly fine. Or or they may not. They may choose to do business in the tried and true way that we've done all these years, and that's probably going to be okay as well. The market will decide.
John, we so appreciate you having on to simplify this even. Like, what is exactly going on?
I didn't take a
That makes
homeowner's class or real estate class. This is like really like a 101 lesson.
I mean,
And it really is
everyone
helpful.
needs to know it.
We want to make it. We want to make the whole process really friendly and inviting. So this feels like we're going in the opposite direction for a moment. But for a season, we're going to have to be real clear about that,
Right.
and we'll be better off. Trust me, the buyers will be so much better educated about their options that will yield much better transactions at the end.
Good in the long term. We'd love to hear that. John, thank you. We'll be right back.
appreciate your
Thanks for
time.
having me.